Where does Trayvon Walker rank?
I mean, he's definitely, when you're making that list, especially because of the way that he's been able to maximize his production from year 1 to 2. And I think that there was obvious concerns because the whole question, Mia, that we had right away was, where do you put Trayvon Walker? And that figuring it out area that we had the season before to what he was able to do. So it's not like he went, okay, we're seeing a little bit of a development. We saw a massive leap from Trayvon in all areas last season, and on a team. It's not like he's on the Dallas Cowboys line or a Philly line where they're stacked with all of these guys. Josh and Trayvon were having to do the majority of the work when it came to getting to the quarterback. So for me, I'm putting him maybe the top, honestly, with some of these guys if we're taking out the rookies, because obviously I can't tell you what Dallas Turner or Latu is going to be doing year 1. I do expect both of them to be good, especially if Latu is healthy. So we'll see. But I think that there's not a name on there that I wouldn't make an argument that he's better.
So I rattled off from the sack leaders last season, number 1 through roughly number 20, because there's a couple ties in there. So that was from TJ Watt, who had 19 sacks, to George Karlaftis, who had 10.5. Do you want to know who the next name is?
Trayvon Walker.
Trayvon Walker.
Yeah.
As well as Bryce Huff, who was also just mentioned, who the Philadelphia Eagles just gave oodles of money to because they believe he is ascending, which then brings us to, is Trayvon Walker, while still a year behind Bryce Huff in terms of the tenure of his time in the National Football League, is he right there? Yeah. Shouldn't this time next year we be having a conversation about Trayvon Walker deserves an extension right now?
Yeah, I think it will be a conversation. And I think what I was doing, Mia, when I was going through this list, as I highlighted names that I think that would be in like my top 30 in the NFL in general. And then from there, I kind of went through of guys that I felt like last season I remember popping out at certain time. AJ Epinesa is one of the ones that really stands out to me. I like him a lot. Then
he was also in a contract year last year, just because we got to give the disclaimer for the Iowa guys, because people think that I just root for AJ Epinesa because I covered him. No, he is
good.
Yes. He was in a contract year.
And again, he missed a little bit of time. He got injured later in the season. A lot of his sacks came early, so is AJ Epinesa one of the guys who we'll see be able to have a full season of production. And to me, guys like that are kind of what pop out. But then when you go comparably to pressures and QB hits and sacks, Trayvon's a decent amount better statistically than those. And obviously we know there's more that comes into it when you're talking about pass rushers. And sometimes the fancy number guys aren't always, just because they don't have 15 sacks doesn't mean they're not good. We've seen other pass rushers maybe not be the ones who directly are knocking down the quarterbacks, but they're assisting in getting to the quarterback, adding that pressure, having him panic, leave the pocket, and then the other guy gets him, But I think that when you're going through this list, guys like that pop out. There's an Epinesa that pops out to me. We mentioned some of the other when it comes to like Marcus Davenport.
A guy who's been hurt, has never really reached his full potential.
And you feel like there going to be a year where he really breaks out. You're waiting for that. Equity Pay, another guy that I feel like we've talked a decent amount about, especially here. But it's a really interesting list, and when you it's kind of exciting to go through and look at this, and when you are ranking them when it comes to Trayvon and when it comes to Josh Allen, just because what's the next step? And in my opinion, it's the TJ Watt production. TJ Watt had the season before, I think, only 8 sacks. It's like 21, 23, 19 every other season. So is Josh Allen to the level where we're seeing that production every single year? And I truly think that he could be that type of guy here in Jacksonville. And then now you have someone like Trayvon too, to where you do feel like they've kind of perfectly started to mesh and being able to add this pass rush. And oh, by the way, a name we've talked about this a ton this offseason, and Eric Armstead, what he adds in the middle and how much that helps them out.
641-1010 is the number to reach us at, and the text line designed by Lifetime Enclosures. Plenty of you guys are popping off already, both there as well as on the MyBookie Digital Studio chat line. Of note, thank you to Robert on the chat line for making a note of this. Let's look at pressures. We heard that a year ago. We heard the hope is that because the Jaguars were among the top 5 teams in pressures in 2022, that will translate to sacks. When you look at individual pressures, I know this is what's going to ruffle some feathers out there in Healigan Nation. Yes, Aidan Hutchinson had the most pressures in the National Football League last year. Max Crosby second, Kayvon Thibodeau third, George Karlaftis fourth. I know there's some of you out there grinding your gears and saying this is why Trayvon doesn't deserve an extension, even if he's playing a position he didn't play in college. We jump ahead. Josh Allen was 8th in pressures. Oh, and well, you look at that. Guess who was 19th? Trayvon Walker. Again, Look,
What also happens to me with the scheme change now, too?
yes.
I think that could factor in huge.
I think that will factor in addition to the fact that Travon Walker has been one of the better run defenders along this Jacksonville Jaguars defensive line. He has been one of the better run defenders in the league since he entered the league as the number 1 overall pick. And so that's where, knowing that Ryan Nielsen just coached the number 1 rush defense in the National Football League, in the Atlanta run defense, in the National Football League of the Atlanta Falcons, and knowing that he consistently had a top 4, top 5 run defense in New Orleans, now you're taking a guy who already excels at that and pairing him with a coordinator who does a great job at putting players in position to take advantage of the run. And we already heard Ryan Nielsen reference it, Taylor. Like, he's not going to say, Trayvon, you play on the right side, Josh, you play on the left side. Okay, let's go. And I think that that's a very interesting argument that we're going to hear from a little bit later in the program when we hear from our friends at Bootleg Football and EJ Snyder and Brett Coleman, because they talked about this. They talked about how so many defense coordinators, and we've had a couple here in Jacksonville, even during my 6 years, who started as defensive line coaches, traditionally, because they're so focused on the defensive line, because they're so focused on acquiring elite talent and saying, we're just going to line up, play you straight, our guys are going to bully you, and we're going to leave our corners on an island, and they're going to hold up in coverage as long as our defensive line holds up their end of the bargain and they get after you in under 4 seconds. I think that's what a traditional defensive line coach who becomes a defense coordinator does. Yeah. I don't believe that's Ryan Nielsen. Yeah. I believe Ryan Nielsen, he's already referenced the fact that Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker have to be comfortable rotating inside, coming over a guard. That's a mismatch. He is seeking mismatches, not you are an outside linebacker, you play here 75% of the snaps.
Well, look, and there's the conversations of how important being able to not only rush the passer, but also set the edge, how important that is. And the one critique of the reason I truly believe Yannick Ngakoue has been on 4 teams since he left here is because he was awful against the run. It's great that you can cause some pressure. It's great that you can stir up the quarterback. I also think it's a reason Dallas Turner started to drop this last season, because he's like a true pass rush guy, but not as elite or not as good when it comes to stopping the run. And so to have a guy that like Trayvon Walker, if you can count on him getting 9, 10, 11 sacks, but also him be, like you said, the guy that is able to set the edge and really help against the run, so important. And so you have a guy that can do both.
The Heeligans are having a good conversation right now, and they don't even realize it on the text line, because you're all kind of chiming in the same thing, even though for some of you, it's a question of Trayvon Walker is the biggest bust since Jamarcus Russell. Yes, we just had someone text that in.
That's weird.
Versus those of you who are noting, while multiple names that we listed in terms of the top sack getters a year ago, as well as those individuals who were at the Sack Summit this weekend, come from the Houston Texans.
Yeah.
And therefore, there will be 2 or 3 of them together. You could make the argument Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker combined as teammates for the most sacks of any duo in the National Football League last year. And now you're adding Eric Armstead. Oh, and by the way, thank you 403 for noting, you're adding a healthy Devon Hamilton. And I think that is equally as important.
And a guy like Travis, who also historically has been able to factor in to that pass rush and get to the quarterback, especially in this scheme.
Right. Well, so you're stopping the run.
Yes.
By virtue of adding guys, and you're also keeping guys fresh. And that has been my critique since Trayvon Walker entered the National Football League. Not of Trayvon, but of how he's been handled. I've talked to Trayvon about it, because I've said to him, and you've probably listened to the interview on our 1010XL YouTube channel, is it sustainable for him to play 85% of the snaps? When you look at what Houston's doing, you look at what Philly does when they load up on pass rushers, they're rotating guys in and out. It is not this, okay, Josh plays 85% of the snaps at right and Trayvon plays 85% at left.
Yeah.
That is unsustainable in the modern National Football League, because you have cyborgs on both sides of the ball. Yeah. And while certainly Trayvon Walker is a freak of nature, I just don't think that is – he will not be at his full potential if you're running him ragged. And that is what has happened here over the last 2 years. And I agree with Duval.
I'm just also trying to figure out how 10 sacks is a bust.
Right. And I agree with Duval TV, who noted it's 10 sacks. It's a position he's never played before until he got to the National Football League. Oh, and by the way, he's never missed a game.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, there was no pressure in the interior. Devon Hamilton was battling all season, obviously, with his injury, his thing that was going on. So there was a lot of other factors that were going into some of the issues that were happening on the defense up front, and you had a guy get 10 sacks in year 2. It's so weird. The bust word is weird to me. Maybe because it's number one, and that's always going to be the thing, is he was the number one pick, and he was picked over Aidan Hutchinson, so his entire career is going to be compared to every single stat and number Aidan Hutchinson has done. But I truly think, and I'm trying to remember who we talked to.
Taylor,
he
also
ago.
had 1.5 less sacks than Aidan Hutchinson.
Yeah, that's I'm like
we're
so
splitting
weird.
hairs out here, people. Max Crosby had 14.5 sacks. Josh Allen had 17.5, and we just sat here and said that Max Crosby's better than Josh Allen.
Yeah,
are we wrong? Because I don't think we are.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, you could make the argument that Aidan Hutchinson may have had more sacks last year, but Trayvon Walker has the higher ceiling.
Do you think that the narrative would change if the Jags got him at like 4 or 5?
Yes.
And it wasn't the first pick?
Yes.
Like drastically, I think it would be a different conversation.
Drastically different. And I think that what people need to understand, it was a historically weak class. There was only one quarterback taken in the first round in the 2022 NFL draft. And I'm sorry, the Jaguars were not going to take Sauce Gardner number 1 overall. Even if they had traded the pick, no one was taking Sauce Gardner number 1 overall. No one was taking Derek Stingley Jr. number 1 overall. Yeah. It's that simple. It came down to 2 pass rushers, and the team that many of you presumably root for in this town opted for the guy who, if only because of his traits, had the higher ceiling, and to Taylor's point, was also the better run defender.
Yeah.
In a division that, oh, by the way, when he was drafted, featured Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor. Oh, and a couple other pretty good running backs like Dameon Pierce in Houston too.
Well, that's what we talked about a ton. The whole reasoning around that was because they're like, hey, we have a guy named Derrick Henry in your division. You've got to figure out a way to stop him. And obviously, we know Derrick, what he was able to do even the final game this last season. It's who he is, and he's out of the division now. But you still want that guy, in my opinion, that is able to do both. Because if not, then you are, like, let's just say you have a guy who's a true pass rush guy, but then you have to figure out the run, and you're going to add additional people to your defense that maybe you technically don't need, because now Trayvon can do both.